Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Queensland Academy of Arts and Sciences webinar, kindly hosted by the QUT Data Science Centre. We thank them for providing the platform for this webinar today. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we speak from today and pay respects to their descendants, past, present, and emerging. My name is Brenda Gannon. I'm based at the University of Queensland, where I'm Professor of Health Economics, working across several disciplines with industry and government sectors, nationally and overseas. Much of our research in health economics involves consumers, their input, their opinions, and their values. Many examples exist, maybe in symposiums or in making decisions about Medicare items. And all of these meetings, we have consumers involved who can present us with the reality of their condition, quality of life, and healthcare expenditure. So in developing this webinar today, I came across this project which fascinated me about dark sky friendly lighting. And in this, it advocates that we can help to reduce light pollution by dimming night lights, using timing switches, all helping us to be good citizen scientists. And then only yesterday, I also saw that this is of concern locally, where now there's calls for light pollution legislation. And then another example that we have of citizen science is that of local volunteering, where people volunteer to look after beaches, but then are incentivized to withdraw their services if the policy is not as they would like it to be. And this was kindly sent to us by a colleague also at the QAS, Rowley, Sussex. So in my own sector, in health research, this sector is often referred to as consumer sector or even public and patient involvement or lived experience. Lots of different terminologies, but in fact, all of these are citizen science volunteers. And of course, as people are time poor, the danger is that we will lose this strong citizen science theme unless we continue to value it. So I'm grateful really to all of the speakers today who have waited patiently and worked with us towards developing this webinar for today. And we have tried to develop a strategy to include as many relevant and representative disciplines as possible. So today we're going to get perspectives about different disciplines, including public policy and decision making, for citizens and with citizens, science and environmental advocacy, ecological perspectives as applied to sports science, and involving consumers in mental health research. So I want to thank all of these speakers. Each will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will have hopefully a time for question and answer session. So as we go along today, please submit your questions into the Q&A or chat box, and hopefully we can get to them and answer them. The lineup today is Professor Brian Head from University of Queensland, Centre for Policy Futures, former director of the centre. Then we have Associate Professor Jen Seevinck from QUT, Chief Investigator in QUT Design Lab and leader in the QUT More Than Human Futures Group. This is then followed by a representative from UQ and Queensland Academy of Sport, Associate Professor Carl Woods. And finally, we'll have Associate Professor Zoe Rutherford from Queensland Centre for Mental Health Research, also affiliate at UQ in Public Health, bringing us a government perspective and a focus on mental health. So I'm going to hand you over now to the first speaker, Brian Head, and I have shared his slides here. And so, Brian, as you need to move along, please just indicate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as Brenda has said, I'm involved in public policy, political science, in a wide variety of examples. What I want to do as the first speaker is to do a little bit of setting the scene, a little bit of history, a few conceptual distinctions, and thinking about the kind of trends in various areas of policy and service delivery. So this rather wordy slide says basically that in the old days, we trusted elites to do the decisions for us. We rely on experts and leaders and executives, and there's very little role for ordinary citizens to influence the big corporate decisions made by governments, by businesses, and so on and so on. And as a big generalisation, I'd say those days are long gone. Why has there been change? I suggest three big trends that have influenced how things have developed. One is clearly communications and marketing technology. They have transformed both the business sector and the political sector. And there's now a very substantial, a multi-level two-way flow between the professionals who run organisations and the various kinds of citizens and consumers. And it's now possible through these new technologies to get instant feedback, and this is seen as valuable for both the governmental sector and the business sector. Secondly, there's a lot of developments around consumer rights and protection. Over the last 30 years, there's been a lot of legislation and regulation around this. One aspect of this is that there are complaints channels, complaints channels that have been developed in many, many sectors. And this provides data for professionals in order to respond, but also two-way feedback for the citizens and consumers. And administrative law has tightened up a lot over the last 30 years in terms of requiring fair treatment of citizens. And the third big trend, I think, is that local knowledge and lived experience has become increasingly valued. I'll talk about aspects of that on the next slide, but lived experience, local knowledge provide rich understandings of the complex problems we face and also help us to think about feasible solutions. The argument in this point is that science in itself doesn't give us enough. We need to have a much broader view. So on this second slide, I'll make a distinction between four overlapping kinds of things that have been going on, and try and sort out some terminology. But you can't legislate on the way people are going to use terms. So no doubt people will use terms in a different way. But I'm trying to say a little bit about, first of all, citizen science. In recent decades, there has been a big swing in this direction. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised to see that there's something called the Australian Citizen Science Association, which I did not know existed as a coordinating body, bringing together many, many groups. And basically, citizen science, the way it's normally talked about, is that it relies on volunteers. They're essentially collecting information, they're sharing local experience, and this goes to various kinds of professional or expert bodies to make sense of and respond. And it's especially encouraged, in my own experience, in areas where widespread observations are highly valuable, but where funding for doing a thorough job with, say, a big research grant is simply not available. We can talk about examples perhaps in the Q&A. Citizen engagement is another kind of notion that's come up in the literature in recent times. Basically, citizens taking opportunities to voice their opinion, to provide feedback on proposals and plans. In some cases, citizens, say in a local area, might go a bit further and self-organise some kind of advocacy group to tackle a local issue. But it's essentially about methods for influencing what's going on in the neighbourhood or indeed at a regional level around proposals and plans and projects. And then thirdly, ramping up the amps a bit, there's been a lot of discussion lately about co-design or co-production of services and policies. This is where community members are closely involved, particularly with government officials, but it could be other kinds of professionals in long-term collaborations, reviewing and improving public services. The same kind of thing might be happening in some niche areas of the business sector as well. In the government sector, this approach of co-design and close involvement in collaborations is seen as highly valuable for rebuilding level of trust in public institutions, given that trust has been on the decline in the face of all kinds of crises, disinformation, and populist commentary. And the fourth example is more broadly consumer engagement. people providing commentary and feedback on the products and services that they are using. More actively, people might indeed be invited to work closely with professional designers of products and services in order to better scope those services or products and to tailor them better to meet the needs of specific groups. So those four things are going on at the same time. They heavily overlap. I don't want to say any more about the differences, but clearly there are some different ways of thinking about how citizens and consumers wearing their different hats as voters, but as purchasers of services might get involved in influencing the way services and policies are designed. And the final slide is just saying, well, active citizenship is to be encouraged. It takes many forms. From a normative point of view, something we want to encourage in a democratic society, and encouraging people to be active and informed citizens exercising their individual rights. The argument from people who support this, as do I, is essentially that active citizenship is also instrumentally useful, not just normatively the right thing to do, because it does, at the end of the day, produce better outcomes. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And yes, we will hopefully come back to those examples you were alluding to later on in the Q&A. But I'm going to move on now to the next speaker, which is Jen Seevinck from QUT. I will just unshare the slides there, so you can share your slide if you want to.
Thank you. Yes, so sorry, I'll just a moment. I'm Jen Seevinck. I am in the School of Design at QUT, and I actually have also been a committee member in ACSA, the Australian Centre for Citizen Science, as Australian Citizen Science Association for the Queensland chapter for a few years. I've worked with citizen scientists and in citizen science projects. So I'm very excited to be here and be talking about that. My home is in design. I'm also very passionate about co-design and those kinds of participatory design methods that we are seeing increasingly uptake in projects and in government and in lots of things today. And I think that active citizenship is really the key there, Brian, and it was really great to see some of those definitions. I want to go on to also mention that I'm in the More Than Human Futures research group, so I'm a leader there. And one of the things that we're looking there, which participatory design is really, and co-design is really integral to, is about learning and acknowledging other ways of understanding and learning. So I very authentically and actively try to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands where we are now, the Turrbal and the Yugara people, which is where I'm coming to you from as well. So we've seen some great definitions and discussions that Brian's already given here. I also did a little bit of research. Consumer engagement is not my space specifically, but I believe Hollebeek is quite a good authority there. But I just wanted to level some of the playing field here, or make it clear where I'm coming from, which is seeing that as this kind of interaction between that external consumer and an organization. That's one way in which the participation can actually run. Citizen science being defined, this is one of the key proponents and perhaps the modern originator of citizen science is Bonnie. And so really looking at enlisting the public and collecting data, but then they're also learning. So they're learning to experience the scientific process, and they're learning about what science is. And then co-design, which takes that participation even further. So it's taking it into skills enhancement and democracy as well. So it's not just productivity and product quality, but it's also there are these concepts around shared ownership of process and outcomes. and decision making. So moving in the spectrum, and I guess that's really my key thing that I wanted to share with you today. But before I go on to that, I will acknowledge that I'm coming at this from a design perspective, but then also give a little bit more context here that the Scandinavian tradition and some work that was done in the 70s in the labor movement there, the trade unions, is that that there was this recognition that new computer systems were threatening worker skills and autonomy. And so the unions actually collaborated with researchers like Pelle Ain, who's a real authority here, to design technology that enhanced rather than replaced human expertise, which is very relevant today with AI. But there were these projects like Demos in the 70s and Utopia in the 80s that really kind of established a lot of the processes that we see now and have informed co-design for us in the design field. And I acknowledge that people have different approaches to using these terms, and that, you know, we're going to use them differently. But from a design perspective, this is where it's coming from. And I think it's also useful to come back to this, because one of the key points that that this reveals is that they weren't actually aiming for pure democracy, but it was a negotiated consensus, right? So not only did the workers gain design skills and analytical tools, and the management gained better systems and workplace buy-in, and that both parties were transformed, but also that there are legitimate constraints that were in there, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it invalidates the participatory processes. So there are some kind of tensions in participatory and co-design processes. To what extent should the collaborator be involved and have that agency? Well, going right back to the roots, that was acknowledged, and that it is a negotiation. But a key point here is that it's mutual learning, and there is growth there. And that the conflict is also is a resource, so that becomes a starting point. So citizen sciences then, like I said, I do have some experience working in this space. I guess what I wanted to share there is that there are insights that I've come across there as people have addressed their challenges. So participant attrition is a big deal, losing your citizen scientists, and that's a big deal, and recruiting them, because you have to train them, because there is a lot of questions around the data methods and the data quality. So the quality of that data that's being presented, it needs to be collected with rigorous methods. And to be able to do that, you have to have trained citizen scientists. So there is a training investment there, and there is community building. And both of those are ways to address the participant attrition. And they're also, interestingly, I think, and valuable to note here, that these are aligned with the co-design principles, these participatory design principles that I was just talking about, that there is individual capacity building. There's something in it for the collaborator, for the co-design participant. There's empowerment in there on an individual level that goes beyond the organization and what it serves the organization. And this is particularly relevant in citizen science. It's a great exemplar of why that's working. So then, if looking at these three approaches and the different intents and purposes and gains, I think, you know, there is this kind of degrees of democracy and engagement, and maybe even participation and power distribution. So you can see that your participant gains and consumer engagement. From my understanding, you'll get a personalized experience, a better product for the user. But in the co-design and in citizen science, you'll start to see increased scientific literacy, personal skills, analytical capacity, design skills, things that go beyond that business, that go beyond the organization and their role in the organization. So there's personal growth for them there as well. And there's also this recognition that there's a knowledge system there. And that's why I was talking about it working in terms of the More Than Human Futures Group, and what we're looking at in terms of learning from Indigenous perspectives, is being open for the organisation to be open to different ways of understanding. So, that there is this mutual transformation from the shared expertise is really a key point here. So in terms of this question of citizen science and consumer engagement, are they the same? I'd say that it is really about that participation. And I propose to you that this is a trajectory, that this is a continuum where consumer engagement tends to be on one side. It's giving buy-in and loyalty and feedback on products. But citizen science and co-design start to push us towards mutual transformation where the organization and the individual participant, the collaborator, the scientist, that they're both changing. So you get this mutual skill building and empowerment, and scientific literacy is one example of that. So, and I think a key question here is, what does the participant gain beyond their value to the organization? So to me, that's kind of like a litmus test. And for researchers and collaborators, yourselves working out there in co-design and towards that and looking at that, I would say, well, make the boundaries and constraints explicit from the start. We know that there are challenges, like we saw with the Scandinavian tradition as well, that there are going to be things that just can't be changed. Working in health, I've done a great a project that I was fortunate enough to contribute to with Queensland Health with co-design. And there are really, there are health guidelines and requirements and protocols there that can't be shifted, that don't allow for participants to make changes to. But those sorts of changes, those boundaries and those constraints need to be transparent up front. To invest, to allocate resources for participant skills development so that there is that something that transforms them that they can take away from it. And to recognize and value the different kinds of knowledges, and that when a system or a project is able to do these things, you're going to see mechanisms for participant influence, both parties being transformed, and oftentimes you'll get to see increased networks or relationships or an ongoing presence of that community that's built there. So it becomes self-sustaining as well. And so those things can really go to inform some quality indicators for our grant bodies perhaps as well. So this is another way of saying it. To me, it's a really good litmus test of whether or not something is co-designed. Is there transparency about the boundaries? Is knowledge mutual resource? So as Brian was saying as well, that lived experience, that the experiences of the individuals is a key point that we're recognizing these days, that people bring those perspectives. But we don't just want to gather the input of all of our collaborators. They're not just a resource, they're actually need to be able to be supported to grow and change as well. And we need to acknowledge there are different ways of knowing. So in all of this, that there is this collective resource that's being built and the shared knowledge, that there can be networks, for example, emerging between participants and structures that can emerge beyond the end of the project. I think that's there's some references that I have here for you, but I should perhaps pass this along now to the next speaker.
Thank you so much there, Jen. Fascinating insights, and it's really interesting to see how some of the historical insights align to current day issues as well with AI, which we might come back to. So I'm going to reshare the slides now, and the next speaker will be Carl, if it works. Yep. Carl Woods. So over to Carl. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you all for attending on your Friday lunchtimes. It's an absolute thrill to be here. I will like to preface this by saying, having heard Brian and both Jen speak, there's some wonderful threads that I'll pick up as this slide progresses on, and those two threads I'll foreground now is the participation that Jen was speaking to, and the lived experience that Brian spoke to, or what myself and my research group like to refer to as inhabitant knowledge. Now, I would like to start by emphasising what I do, because I think that's quite important to frame the way I take up with some of these particular concepts that you've heard through from Brian and Jen already. So I'm a theoretical skill acquisition scientist who primarily studies human movement from an ecological meta theory. And this is because I'm trained as an ecological psychologist. Long story short, what that basically means is that I view the emergence of behaviour as unfolding at a relational scale of analysis. So primarily, I don't look at organisms or the environment. I look at the relationships that subsequently unfold between those two bodies. So I see them as being inseparable, and that's an important component to consider as I go on to some of the examples of how we integrate co-design within our particular space of research. Now, as a theoretical skill acquisition scientist, I hold a really unique position. So as Brenda started the presentation with, I'm an associate professor in the School of Human Movement and Nutrition Sciences at the University of Queensland, but I also hold a conjoint position with the Queensland Academy of Sport as the learning design lead. So that means I sit in this really interesting space between academia and service provision. And that affords me a really rich opportunity to kind of bring together what Jen was referring to as these different sources of knowledge to generate what we hope is not only impactful research academically by way of thought leadership, but also quite pertinent research that leads to immediate changes on multiple scales of analysis. Now, I'll go straight into the actual concept that we're here to talk through today: citizen science and consumer engagement. Brian provided some wonderful insights, followed up by Jen with regards to various definitions. What I'm going to draw on for the next few minutes primarily relates to the concept of co-design, which from the ecological meta theory is critical. And the critical component of that resides in this notion that we refer to as affordances. Now, if you recall, I articulated at the start, we look at the relationships between organisms and their environments as the behavioural scale of our analysis. Now, the mechanism for behaviour that we tend to focus upon is denoted through the concept of affordances. And affordances are very much entangled into our respective action capabilities. So how I, as a particular person with anatomical features, might look at a surround might be very different to how my 9-year-old niece looks at the same surround. I look at it in terms of different opportunities or affordances that might be present to support varying types of behaviour. So again, let's just shelve that for the time being. What I would like to quickly touch on is a really interesting advent. I guess in preparing this talk, I thought in my particular space, I guess in the sports sciences specifically, but I probably see it quite broadly in the human movement sciences, who would be the consumer be and how do we subsequently engage them? So for the premise of today, I want to talk through the consumer being everyone from community sports engagement, so whether that be community athletes and coaches, people who engage in physical activity, all the way up to those that I work with at the Queensland Academy of Sport, high performance coaches and high performance athletes, and the various strategies that we might use to engage with them. Now, my slide's a bit off, as you can see, or it's looking a bit off on my screen, but I want to start with how we engage from a research perspective. And you can see I've got these two spheres of knowledge, quite abstract, but quite pertinent all the same. And what this articulates is that we're bringing together, like Jen was referring to, different sources of knowledge, hopefully to co-produce and co-design pertinent bodies of research. And in our space, that extends from high-performance coaches. As you can see, a paper on slide that we've subsequently published brings together the experiences of an Olympic canoe slalom coach, of which we support through some theoretical advances in our particular space. And what that does is it leads to this biographical reflection that's both theoretically quite rigorous, but experientially quite informed. And it leads to the emergence of really interesting questions with regards to how we denote what impact might subsequently look like in coaching spheres and from a theoretical perspective as well. That's one particular component with regards to research, where we actually invite expert practitioners into the research process, hopefully concurrently increasing their literacy with regards to how to actually engage in these types of scientific narratives. That's at one end of the spectrum. At another end of the spectrum, we engage in quite significant amounts of participatory research. As I said at the start, as an ecological psychologist, we tend to look at behaviour emerging at a relational scale of analysis. And one particular challenge that our group's addressing is how to promote and how to support more physical activity at a societal scale. Rather than adopting a strategy with regards to policy, our approach is to go out into the world and observe how people take up with various features of their surrounds in really unique ways. And one of those ways related to how we can concurrently help people engage in risk-taking behaviour in safe contexts. Some of our research led to the integration of a communal bouldering wall, where we engaged in significant amounts of research to identify how people concurrently want to use spaces that we could reappropriate, and then concurrently integrate bouldering walls. That builds off of this concept of spontaneity, how we can design for spontaneity through the observations of how people currently take up with particular features of their surrounds. The other end that I want to talk through relates to performance support, not necessarily from a research perspective, but this deals with how my servicing requirements engage with this process of co-design. And we see this in our particular space through a really visually unfriendly schematic, which you can see at the bottom of the slide, which we refer to as a department of methodology. And a department of methodology basically is a way to bring together a whole heap of experiential and empirical knowledge in such a way that enables us to design the most effective or conducive learning environments in respective contexts. So that brings together the knowledge that I might have empirically, along with the coaches, the athletes, and other performance support teams that subsequently that come together. And we find this becomes a really quite interdisciplinary, but at times even beyond that, quite a transdisciplinary space where we're able to engage in quite rich narratives and discussions to co-design various practice interventions and various feedback strategies to augment components of performance that's of meaning to athletes. The analogy that we often use is we like to bring more voices to the table. Our approach is that if we're able to bring more voices to the table through these guise of a department of methodology, we're concurrently able to design the most theoretically informed but experientially pertinent interventions to support aspects of athlete learning and development. So I might leave it there, Brenda. I might maybe throw it to Zoe and look forward to any Q&A that might subsequently come. But thank you again for your time. It's been a thrill.
But now I hand you over to Zoe, as Carl said, and then after that we'll have time for some Q&A.
Lovely, thank you so much, and thanks to all the presenters before me to laying a lot of the foundations for what I'm going to be talking to this afternoon. So I'm Zoe Rutherford, and I am the Mental Health Evaluation Research Stream Lead at the Queensland Centre for Mental Health Research, and I have the privilege of being a permanently funded researcher within a health context. And I'd just like to acknowledge how rare that is, and indeed how privileged I am to be able to do what I do. So for those of you who don't know who QCMHR are or haven't heard of them before, we're an academic health partnership between the University of Queensland and Queensland Health. And so our research and researchers are embedded within the health system and dotted around several of the HHSs within Queensland. And so for me, I'm based at Wacol within Westmoreton Hospital and Health Service at the Park, where there are several high dependency and secure mental health units situated. What that means is that we're really uniquely positioned to connect health services and academic expertise and experience to be able to maximise the potential of our research, which is and has the aim of reducing the impact of mental illness within our communities. So in terms of our stream and kind of who we are, what we do, we're, I guess, one of the new kids on the block within QCMHR, having started around 4 years ago now. And as I said, permanently funded through Queensland Health as of last financial year. So we work with Queensland Health, services, organisations and communities to develop evaluations that meet their needs and that are fit for purpose. The majority of our work, as I said, is being conducted through Queensland Health to evaluate their hospital and community-based services. And that's to understand how they're working, or maybe not so much. How can they be improved? So to drive quality improvement at that local level, but also at the state level as well, to enable the Queensland Health and mental health, alcohol and other drugs branch to drive their programmes of work related to that. And then thinking about how that then informs their future development and sustainability. So very much attending to the Better Care Together strategy this time round, but then also to inform the strategy that will be due in 2027. What's central to the work that we do is the collaboration and co-design of the frameworks, methods, data and reports that we produce with people with lived experience of mental ill health. Without them, we couldn't truly ensure that we're asking the right questions of the right people at the right time, and that we're making sure that we deploy the right tools for the job and pull existing data, the right existing data from complicated health systems. So where we are is really messy. It's real world, it's people's real lives. And because we're talking about people's mental health, we're dealing with lots of existing trauma, generational trauma. And when we're thinking about engaging with people who've lived experience in this space, there are lots of additional considerations that we've got to take into account when we're asking people to share that and using that and collaborating that as part of what we do and how we do it. So hopefully I'm going to touch on a few of those things in terms of how we do what we do to ensure that we're able to do that. It's important to state, I guess, that doing this stuff within the mental health space is not new. Oops, excuse me. And it's been done to a lesser or a greater extent for many, many years now. The Lancet Psychiatry last year published their commission on the lived experience of mental health research, which really outlines a framework for how to do the inclusion of lived experience within research. And I was at the Themes conference, so the Mental Health Systems conference this week, and we're very much seeing some high quality lived experience, collaboration, co-design, co-research within this space. So there's a lot of opportunity to look to the mental health research area for the how-to on this stuff. So definitely look to this framework if this is something that you're interested in. But I think also really important to note is that this year in June, Lancet Psychiatry updated their guidelines to authors on how they are requiring people to state how living experience, inclusion and leadership have taken place as part of research. So, you know, a real call to arms to do it properly, do it safely, and also acknowledge where that has been So as has been done before, I'm just going to frame kind of our process in how we then include lived and living experience within our research, both in terms of the design of evaluations, evaluation frameworks, and then in terms of collecting data. So we put the consumer at the centre of the work that we do, both in terms of the socio-ecological model, so consumers and carers being at the centre or at the micro level. And we use our service journey in terms of it to guide and use a aim framework to guide us through the development of key evaluation questions that relate to the reach, adoption, implementation, effectiveness and maintenance of that service. So effectively, are those services reaching the people for whom they were intended? And by using a mixed methods approach, by getting the quantitative data from those complicated systems, analysing them, we can then understand whether they are or not. But what's really important is to have that qualitative information from both consumers, carers, but also service deliverers, so staff, which in this space include peer workers, not people from non-government organisations, as well as clinical staff, and then thinking about then how that fits within that complicated system from a department managerial perspective, from a health service perspective, and then outside of that health service. So thinking about the federally funded people who refer into those services, and then those who then take people into the community back again. So we're able to understand then the why and the how things are happening in terms of, you know, that reach, adoption, implementation, effectiveness and maintenance. So that's the scaffold, that's the science bit, I guess. The rest of the co-design is very much around building relationships with people. First of all, understanding who are the stakeholders within this system, and then how they relate to one another across the socio-ecological model. But then also developing relationships with them in order to ensure that we are getting the right information out of them to be able to develop our key evaluation questions, to make sure that our evaluations are fit for purpose, that we're asking the right questions of the right people. But also that we are not burdening people and we're not asking questions for question's sake from an ethical perspective as well. Clinicians are very heavily burdened by the weight of service need within mental health, both within the hospital and health services, within the primary care situation, and also within community. So it's really important that when we are asking people's input on what we're doing, that we are consulting, we are collaborating authentically, and that it's not a pseudo consultation. And so once we have gone through our project initiation phase, where we're understanding those stakeholders, doing that mapping, who's who in the zoo, making sure everybody's included, we bring them together to ensure that we have a good project governance. So we have a project advisory group. When we're including lived experience consultants within this space, so people who have a specific lived experience of the service that we're looking at, which is really important. So again, important to acknowledge that not everybody with a mental ill health or mental ill health challenges have the same experience, and so getting the right experience match the service that we're looking at is really important. I think then building capacity with that is really important to do, and it's inherently important for us to be part of that. So talking to the themes around ensuring that we're training people to do that thing is really important, but also allowing people a safe space to have those conversations and those consultations and that collaboration. And so making sure that the composition of a steering group is safe, is that we manage power imbalances in there, or that we have separate conversations dependent on the people involved within that evaluation. We have conversations within different spaces through teams. We go and meet people where they are, really important to get that genuine collaboration going, to understand also the context that people are sitting in, either within service or within community as well. That really enables us to understand whether our questions are going to be met in the right way, that we're going to elicit the answers that we need, and that we're not wasting people's time. Another really important thing that we do, and that we are really privileged to be able to do, I think, given the way that we're funded, is to remunerate people for their time. You know, these lived experience consultants have that expertise within this space, and it's important that we value their time, not just from, you know, genuinely including them within the work that we do, but also in terms of paying them adequately. That also goes for consumers when we are conducting the research. And I think that as researchers, and thinking about ethics committees particularly, we really do need to rethink remunerating people for, or the tension around that from an ethical perspective. It's not coercion when you offer people a gift card or a voucher for their time. It's valuing them within this process, and getting that reciprocity in terms of, okay, well, we're valuing your time and your input to this process. You're not just getting payment, you're getting the training as well if you're helping us design our projects, but you're also then getting those skills and experience to be able to take on to the next project. And I've been really lucky to be able to offer people references to jobs where they're using their lived experience, for example, as a means of doing that. We also like to, where possible, include people with lived experience within the data analysis. And we've just employed a lived experience project officer and named research within our team. And we're going to be able to help and support people from communities to be able to enable us to do that more authentically, I think, going forward. This is a work in progress. As I said, we have a framework to work to, but it's really tricky to do this genuinely, authentically, and within the mental health space without harm. And so you have to ensure when you're doing this work that you have time and resource, as we've mentioned previously, and that there is expertise within your team to be able to hold and support these people when sharing their experience gets tough, and being able to support them to access their own support or external support, but also as a team, hearing people's stories as well, being able to voice that and share that, and have some self-care around that as well is also really important. So hopefully I've kind of whistle-stop toured you through kind of how we do what we do, but I think it's really important to highlight that it's challenging, it takes a lot of resource, but it has to happen, because otherwise you don't get to do research that is of use, that is going to make the difference to the people for whom it's intended, and you're not going to be able to ensure that services are being delivered and reducing the impact of mental ill health, which is the aim of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, for a very detailed description of your work there, very skillful work, and the methods, the real life methodology there. So now we've had all speakers, and we've gone from theoretical approaches to history to methods, the applications. A lot of really, like, citizen science and consumer engagement is huge. It's probably bigger than anyone realized before they signed up for today. And it's fascinating. So I want to go back to some of your talks, because I know some of you wanted to say a little bit more, and maybe I'll start with Brian. And you did mention that you might have some examples, and I'd be particularly interested, even from yourself, but also from any of the other panel, of anything that actually then gets implemented in policy. So consumers like to be involved, but then they like to see the benefit. Everybody always says to us, well, what's the benefit for me? And we try to encourage them into providing their data or getting involved in projects with the benefit that they might achieve at the end. So have we any examples of that, Brian, or anybody? But we'll start with Brian, maybe what you wanted to talk about in terms of your examples earlier.
Well, just very, very quickly. I mean, from my own personal experience, I was supervising a PhD some years ago on essentially citizen science around bird watching, looking for endangered species. And as the other speakers have said, you know, it requires reliable data. It requires training and coaching and pooling of ideas in order to make a difference. But what struck me was that in some areas where it's not feasible to have like satellite technology telling us where all the birds are on the planet, you've got to have pretty close observational data, and that relies very much on volunteers. And it was an area where there's a high level of vulnerability if we couldn't get that kind of data. So yes, there are technical devices to help, like cameras, for example, in various locations. That's a terrific breakthrough, I believe. But it just struck me that there are so many areas where relying on volunteers to do good stuff, like planting out, revegetating a creek, or whatever it might happen to be. Or I've got some other examples around looking after the health of the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, that's one sort of area where I thought that citizen science had become incredibly important. Another example, say from what you might call co-design, are various in public policy things like having a citizens jury to look at a particular contentious issue. And in 20 seconds, I mean, basically it relies on having independent people who are not pre-committed to a particular point of view. It's not like a town hall meeting where all the usual suspects turn up and shout at each other. A citizens jury is where you get ordinary citizens who are selected more or less by random in a representative way across the population. They are then exposed to maybe a couple of days of structured discussion with input from all kinds of experts and stakeholders, and regular sort of plenaries where they talk about what they're thinking about, and then they come up with some pathways for further consideration back to decision makers. That's something that's been explored increasingly globally over the last 20 years with some terrific examples that I don't have time to talk about. But there's so many very positive experiments going on. And this is not possible unless there is this rethinking about the importance of lived experience to complement, not displace, but to complement technical expertise, and to understand that the complex problems we're dealing with do require a sharing of knowledge and thinking about what is going to be a feasible improvement. I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that. And I can imagine really skillful work as well in the bird watching and trying to get some accurate data that must have been quite a wonderful job was done. I'm wondering also if anybody else wants to add in any example that they might have of an implementation in policy. Yeah, Jen?
Yeah, not in policy necessarily, but I can certainly speak to one that has got direct benefit. The Zika Mozzie Seeker is an award-winning citizen science project that's been running through Metro Health South for a few years with Brian Montgomery. I worked with him a few years ago as well to look at science engagement in that. But what's interesting about that is that is where the data collection is happening and where the science methods are happening. So in terms of and the benefits. So what he's doing is he's getting people in the community in Brisbane South in the Metro South Health catchment area to collect mosquito eggs, and then they send them in. And so there's this educational aspect and training aspect there to learn about where the mosquitoes will lay their eggs and the habitats, but also how to get rid of them by understanding where they breed, how we can get rid of them. And it's really important stuff because by being able to then do the data analysis, now this is done by a technician back at the facility. So the difference between the data that's being collected and the analysis of the scientific method is quite clean, then it's not so challenging to make a case that it's not going to be valid outcomes that you've got. But it's really important stuff, because these eggs are able to tell you what type of mosquito it is. And it's watching for a new invasive mosquito, or a couple of invasive mosquitoes that we're really worried about, so that we don't get Japanese encephalitis, which we have had an outbreak recently, but Zika and chikungunya, which the local mosquitoes can't carry, right? So it's actually that monitoring that's happening by the local people as well. So it's beneficial on a number of levels, and I like to talk about that as an example as well, because it's empowering those individuals, and I think that's really important. Is that the people that are contributing to it are not just seen as a resource, and it's not just about hearing them, but they're actually individually getting something out of it as well. It's really great to see that coming through in these discussions. Because I think that's
sure. It's not just
that's the spirit behind co-design. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about the benefit at the end, but also the empowerment, as you say, that people get out of being involved. That in itself can be the reward for people, depending on the project at hand, and their time. Their time is valuable. So I'm also wondering too a little bit about data privacy. Has that ever come up? Particularly maybe for people who are collecting the data, like Zoe or Carl, in the context of performance sports, or Zoe, I'm presuming in the mental health research area. It can be quite a tricky area to navigate, and how do you manage that and ensure that you know, it's like a retention in a way. How do you ensure you get people on board, but also first of all, and then secondly, you know, have retention strategies to ensure that the projects can get to the end and be successful?
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, the two ways that we include lived experience. So one, in terms of the design. So I mentioned the project advisory groups. So what's really important, as I said, is holding space for people and making sure they feel safe, but also that we do adequate debriefs with people. So typically our projects last around 18 months, if not longer. And so we have the opportunity to build long-lasting relationships with people, which is really, really important. I think getting consent for people to check in with them, and as making sure that we do that and follow up and genuinely are able to do that. We've had several examples of people who aren't traveling so well partway through the project and have dipped out, and we've been able to consult with them on the side and help them feel included still, and when they felt a bit better, bring them back into the projects by having a pre-brief to a meeting, making sure that we're tabling what's happening beforehand, giving people a chance to think about things before they can contribute, and if they don't during that meeting, then they can do during a debrief session. So those are the types of things in terms of the kind of the governance and advisory perspective. But through the development of tools and our, you know, participant information sheets and our interview schedules, making sure that we have our consultants' input on those to make sure that they're accessible, that they are, you know, feasible and acceptable by people who are inviting consumers to take part, and so on, and the different ways that we invite people to take part. That's been really important. But then from a confidentiality perspective, a lot of people who take part are happy to do so. They want to be seen and heard, and they're happy to put their names to things. But in terms of being able to get in touch with people coming through the health system or having left the health system, so having a retrospective view on people's service experience, that's really tricky, because the health service don't hold people's or aren't able to get back in touch with people after they've left the service. So thinking more dexterously around how do we invite people and reach people to represent those populations is pretty tricky. So yeah. there's
Okay.
more to
Well,
do around that.
thank you, Zoe. And I'm sure, and maybe Carl probably concurs with that and has other ideas, but unfortunately we've run out of time. I knew we could spend many hours talking about this, and I really want to thank you all again for your valuable time in talking today, and thanks to everybody for attending and your wonderful questions, and hopefully this inspires you further into continuing on with good citizen science into the future. Thank you.